introduce Mr. Said Mouline, who very kindly just joined us from Paris, and he was in Nigeria before that. He's the president for he basically is an expert in energy and environment, which just shows how a visionary he is, because back in 1985, he was applying for engineering school, but always wanted to study energy with a focus in the environment. So he went to the Polytechnic University in Grenoble, France, studied engineering, and then he studied in University of Pennsylvania in the United States with a focus always in the environment. And today he's the CEO of the Moroccan Moroccan Agency for Energy Efficiency. So Morocco is very advanced with very ambitious targets on renewables, and the necessity is the mother of inventions. So it's kind of a blessing for them that they're not endowed with a lot of carbohydrates, and they have to come up with a very efficient plan. And I'm going to start by asking you a question to give us an overview of the Moroccan energy sector, please.
Thank you, Christian. It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I would like to welcome you again in Morocco. It's, I think, in the energy sector we had an approach that is, we can say today, is quite a success because of a vision. The Kingdom of Morocco has, first of all, a context, energy context, that show that a very energy dependent country. More than 95% of our energy needs were imported. We have no oil, no gas, no coal. We are importing all the fossil fuel. But at the same time, we were looking how to look, because we need more and more energy for our development, and we were to look how to decrease this energy dependence. And the approach was also to look at how it started in the 60s, 70s by using dams, hydropower, and former King Hassan was developing a hydro program every year, a dam in the country. In the 80s, 90s, when the barrel reached $100 per barrel, our energy bill reached $10 billion. It was quite high for our economy, and that's how we also have a new approach, a very interesting approach. And in 2009, the King's letter in the for the energy policy announced that we will give priority to renewable energy and energy efficiency in our energy policy, with objective to reach 52% of renewable energy in electricity capacity in 2030, and 20% of energy efficiency in 2030 in industry, transport, housing, public lighting, agriculture. In all those sectors, we should stop wasting energy. At the same time, we should develop more and more renewable energy, national energy. And that's how we developed those programs. But that was the strategy decided at the highest level of the state. Objective to reach, dedicated agencies. It's one thing very important. You need institutions to implement those policies. Mazen is in charge of the big power renewable energy projects, and AME is in charge of energy efficiency in all the 5 sectors that I mentioned. So it was very important to look at how a country, very energy dependent, tried to decrease this energy dependence in an economic way. Because of course, you can use more and more national resources, but if they're too expensive, the impact will not be like what we want. We want affordable, clean energy for the population, for the industries, for the cities. It's very important to have this in mind. So the vision is here, the policy is here, the objectives are here, the institutions are here. We also developed a new legislation. Regulation is very important in this field. The utility was, at this time, monopoly on electricity. We had to open that. It's not easy to convince actors in this field to change the way, especially when you have monopolies, when you have national utilities. To open that, we had to discuss, and we opened the market for electricity. Today, we have project completely private, producing electricity for the private sector, and we have project developed by the private sector, but for the utilities. And that's the approach, I think, that can show that how we manage not only to develop the projects, to reach our objectives, but to reach so low price in renewables today. For example, the last tender for wind is 850 megawatt project, $1.4 billion project. The offer were between 3 and 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So we are developing renewables in completely economic way. More than that, renewables are becoming cheaper than our coal power plants. When you have 3 cents per kilowatt hour as an offer to the utility for a big wind project, 4 cents per kilowatt hour for solar PV. And it's an approach that shows that when you have governance, when you have transparency in the project, you can reach those prices. And that's why we are quite happy about our institutions and how things were done, because we were also amazed by those prices. And in the beginning, everyone was saying, why should we go to renewables? It's more expensive. We're not a big emitter country. Morocco is emitting 7 times greenhouse gas than a European. Why should not continue just with the same approach by using fossil fuel? And I think it's the vision at the highest level of the state. The King's letter was clear. And it's a vision that showed to prepare ourselves for the future. And that's how we managed to have those projects implemented. The King's letter was dating in 2009. We're almost 10 years after that. And I don't know if you have time to visit Ouarzazate. You'll be glad. It's one of the biggest solar plants in the world. And to visit that today in the desert where there were nothing, how things were implemented, and how it is important to look at how projects can be developed by the private sector. But for that, you need public-private partnership. And PPPs is very important on those fields. I was in charge of the Commission of PPPs in the COP22 committee. During the Marrakesh event, we had to show how in each sector linked to this green economy, which is developed today in different fields, you can have the private sector doing huge possibilities, projects. What we did is how to attract those actors, and you have to show that it's done in a completely transparent way. And the second point is how to attract green financing. We managed to attract green financing for those projects. We're talking about 20, 25 years long projects. So you need to have governance for that. If you want private sector to invest in such long project, you need to have the vision, you need to have the institutions, and you need to have the approach. And the approach is quite different than what happened in Europe, where to develop renewables was really linked to subsidies. We didn't want to do that. We couldn't afford to do that. We wanted to have an approach completely open, and the market decided the price of renewables. That changed the way. That's how we managed today to have those low price for solar PV and wind. By the way, I heard in the Middle East that they reached less than 3 cents per kilowatt hour for PV. So prices are going down and down in this field, and that's something that is going to change a lot of things. Not only for big projects, as I mentioned, solar and wind, what we managed to have today, but also for small projects, because all the applications, and the agency is working today on a field quite interesting. We are helping farmers to switch, for example, we are helping farmers to switch from diesel pump to solar pumps. And it's a program that we show you need to sensibilize people, you need to train people how to install, to size the technology, and also you need financing. So with the local bank, the Crédit Agricole, we are financing farmers to switch from diesel pump to solar pumps. Because we stopped subsidizing fossil fuel, the payback for a solar pump for a farmer changed from 10 years to 5 years. It's very important to know, and that is in strategy to be coherent, if you need to stop subsidizing fossil fuel at the same time. And it's something that shows that you have the economy of renewables and the economy of energy efficiency. When the payback is shorter, the market is here. You need many points. You need regulation, you need financing, you need sensibilization, but with that you can afford to have that. It's very important. So that's the way how we managed to have, I gave the overview and the program of the two agencies, but it's something that is really important today to show that when you have this vision, the objective, the institutions, the regulation, you can reach those approaches.
Thank you. Very surprising to hear that you are able to reach, you said 3 cents for wind and 4 cents for solar. How does that compare with like coal or other costs of other sources of energy in the same unit?
Yeah, of course. The main thing for renewables is that when you have a price, it's the same price for the next 20 years. When you link it to fossil fuel each year, as the price of oil or the price of coal or the price of natural gas can change, you need to, the price is quite different, but it's around 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour today. So when you have all that, it's something that is quite interesting to look at how renewables can play a role. But don't forget also one thing, the intermittency of renewables. When you have big power, you need power for the load. All moment, at night, when there is no sun. So that's why also we developed in Ouarzazate projects with storage, heat storage. It's solar thermal power plants that we have in Ouarzazate, and they can run 3 hours after sunset. Or another one will be with 7 hours after the sunset. So it's something that is really interesting to show that when you have those approach, you can even give the same service as fossil fuel power plants. And that's why some countries are looking for maybe reaching in 2050 100% of renewables. But it's something that is starting. And what we are doing is that, as I mentioned, we are an objective of 52% of the capacity coming from renewables in 2030. But we are still having some coal power plants and some natural gas, combined cycle power plants and other technology, but also, very important, we are connected to our neighbors. We are connected to Spain, connected to Algeria, and I hope very soon to Mauritania. And also we have a project to grid connection to Portugal. And with that, more you are connected, more you can put renewables, because you can share that. It's very important to look at those 2 points concerning renewables. You don't have the same service as with coal power plants or fossil fuel power plants, but you can reach those services when you have connections, when you have storage. Another way of storage also that we have is through dams. We have 2 dams in some regions where we can pump and water when you have more energy, and you can use it as hydro when you need it.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask two more questions quickly and then open up to the group. The first question is, I think you said, when was the first auction that you did for the renewables?
Well,
which year?
The center, we had a center in 1982 in Morocco, the first center for renewable energy. At this time, because of the energy dependence, the former king wanted to look at how technologies can be developed. And in the 90s, we started the small wind program, and it was only some small projects to test the technology. At this time, the prices were much, much higher. But we want to know how the technology can be developed. And in the 90s, it was the first, in 96, the first private project developed, only 30 megawatt, but was developed at this time. So it's a long story.
So tell us about, like, just in the last 5 years, how did that cost decline?
So with this new strategy, well, the price were decreasing. We saw on the PV, for example, how the world price was changing. Of course, one big reason also for that was linked to the industry in China. But it's not only that. It's the projects developed in different countries, even in the US and in Europe, where the market was exploding and how economy of scale became very important in this field. In the wind sector, we followed the price since the 90s to now. We are dividing by 3. At this time, we were around 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and now we are reaching 3 or 4, depending on the sites. And we had a chance in the country that the agency was doing wind measurement in different areas where to find the best wind regime, and also to develop projects in some region in the north and in the south. We have one of the biggest wind regime in the north, in the Strait of Gibraltar. In Spain also, they're developing the wind parks in the same field. But in the south, in Laayoune, near Dakhla, we have also a very, very good wind regime, and that's why we are developing projects there. It's something that is also interesting to know, is linked to the industry that we developed, linked to that. Today, in the windmills, we are reaching 70% of the spare parts produced in Morocco. It took 15 years, for example. We started by doing only the civil work and the cables. Then we had to build the towers. Then the last factory inaugurated in Tangier was to the blades factory. So we are producing step by step all the spare parts for the windmills. It's very important, and it's done in a way that those companies are exporting those products. Because when we're talking about industry integration, we should not look only at your own market. The market is not, we are 35 million people here. The market is not as big for economy, and the economy of scale is very important. So you need to look at how you can produce the spare parts in an economic way and with quality. It's very important.
Thank you. So one last question before we open up to the group. For the benefit, since they have been recently in Nigeria, and then also perhaps you can compare the stage at which Morocco is in terms of energy efficiency and renewables in, let's say, a neighbor like Tunisia that has similar conditions, and then Nigeria, which has a lot of hydrocarbons.
Yes, the difference between, well, we are a very energy dependent country on fossil fuel. We are importing all. Those countries are exporting fossil fuel. Nigeria, Algeria, and that's why the scheme is not the same. When we have domestic price of electricity, of energy, not subsidized, you have to be careful about your energy bill. As citizen, as city, as industry, you need to look at your energy bill, and you have to be careful about that. So our approach was to help those who are using energy to be more energy efficient, to decrease the energy bill by consuming in a right way. In Nigeria or in Algeria, when energy is subsidized, everyone is wasting it. So that's the big difference. And you need to have an approach to have the right price of energy, then you can implement all those policies. Another point, when you talk about not only Nigeria, but all Africa, we have 600 million people today in Africa without access to electricity. It's nonsense. We have plenty of fossil fuel in this continent, we have plenty of renewables in this continent, and we cannot afford to stay in this approach. We had a program in Morocco for rural electrification. In 15 years, we were at 25% of rural electrification rate. We reached 95% with the program for access to electricity to everyone, paid by the government, but also by the regions, and it's very important. And the way of doing rural electrification today can change because of the new technologies and the new price of technologies. That's why in Nigeria we discussed about all the solar mini-grid program that can be developed, how they have almost 100 million people without access to electricity in so rich country. So it's something that has to be implemented in a quick way, because how can you talk about development without having access to energy to the population? So it's something very important. And approach also in Morocco how the private sector plays the role for the electrification when it's done in a good way. That's how it has to be. So the discussion with them was much linked to that, and we hope that together we will talk about much more partnerships.
Thank you. So I'm just going to open the floor for questions from the members.
Thank you. My question has to do with the large oil producers, the large global oil producers, so the likes of Exxon and others. Are you seeing tremendous or not tremendous investment by those types of companies in this area? Are they supportive of these alternative technologies to their primary business, which of course is oil and gas? Thank you.
Yes, of course. We are living in energy transition. We're going to still continue to use oil, use coal, use natural gas in the next 10, 40, maybe 40 years in some countries. What's happening is step by step, of course, renewables are becoming more and more economic, more and more developed in different countries, and that can also develop a new economy in this field as industries and jobs in this field. So oil, depending on what's happening, also I didn't mention the strategy for transport, because it's the big issue also, how electrical mobility is starting also to be implemented in some countries and how it can be developed in others. And it's something that is important to know that because we had a plant, a coal power plant, just starting in south of Morocco also at the same time. Living in energy transition, this means that we're going to still use fossil fuel, but maybe in more efficient way. Also looking at how we can implement projects, knowing that you need to assure a service on energy, especially on the energy sector. So transition will be done step by step, and of course, depending on the country, it will take more years, or sometimes some countries will stay in the other field. But what's happening also linked to environment, to climate change, and all those issues are also in our view. So we have to be careful about that, and of course, that's why you can be more and more, I would say, proactive or not.
But just a follow-up on her question, she asked about specific, like the big oil companies like Shell. Mm-hmm. Do you see any of those? Who are the multinationals or the companies that are doing the renewables here? Are mainly local companies. Which companies are doing that?
Well, all big oil companies are almost in Morocco today, of course. But also, if you look at some gas station, you will have some solar panels on the roof. So they're more and more involved today in this field, and they're looking at how, because all those things were done in an environmental way before. Because of the market, and it's huge, last year in the world, the implementation of power plants, for the first time, renewables were higher than the others. So there is a transition starting in a completely economic way. Wind power are becoming cheaper and cheaper, solar are becoming cheaper and cheaper, and that's why it's something that's going to change things. I didn't mention one thing, it's just because of the renewables you need storage. And what's going on also, what's very new, it's the storage that you can have in your house, storage that you can have in your factory, storage you can have in your industry. And we have a factory plant here in Casablanca, just opened, we launched during the COP22 also. It's a US company, Eaton, developing batteries for households, for factories, and that can be using the electricity of solar panels produced during the day. Then you can assure a service of energy whole day long. So step by step, we are looking at cheaper way of producing and guaranteeing the service of energy in this field. I don't know if
It's very helpful to hear your perspective on the decline in costs in solar compared to some of the other technologies. And I'd be curious to hear more about the Ozazarte, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, solar complex. I believe there are multiple phases in that project, and the costs, I'm sure, have come down over time. But it'd be helpful to hear a bit more about the total cost of the projects over time and how they were financed, and what the investment returns were to the debt or the equity holders.
Financing of those projects were, when you investing in renewables, the investment cost can be high in the beginning comparing to other power plants, but you don't have the cost of fossil fuel after that. And the way of implementing was that project. And Mazen made really a great job how to look at the best price and how to look at green financing. The approach was very new to develop. It was not for solar PV, but solar thermal power plants with energy storage, new technologies. And you have to look at the right partner for that. So you launch a tender, you have a vision, you have different actors in the world that can answer the tender with local partners, Moroccan partners, and they managed to make an offer. Who did the investment? Of course, Mazen prepared the site and looked at how we can have access to water, grid, and everything. But you need investment coming from the private sector. And that's the private sector who made the investment through local banks or to their financing. But also at the same time, 25% of the financing came through green financing that Mazen managed to attract. That's very important. So that's how we managed to have those points. And that's how we reach also those good prices. We decreased, the first 6 plant was quite, the price around more 13 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour, the offer. So it's quite high, but with storage, with guarantee of service. Then tenders, step by step, the second standard, that decreasing the pricing. And now we are competitive. So, and when you add other cheap renewables like wind and PV, solar PV, you can have a mix of cost that is completely affordable with the service. That's the approach. Thank you.
Good morning, or almost afternoon. I just wanted to clarify the openness of the system overall. You mentioned the generation has been open for private investment, but how about distribution and transmission? I guess I think of a major part of the energy efficiency story coming from reducing losses in those areas, and also it's important as there are more renewables in the system, as you mentioned, to have a more robust grid. So who are making those investments? Is it still the government?
Okay.
And might it be open in the future?
Yeah. Well, when we start to open, the market is open for very high tension only. For big consumer, cement industry, steel industry, mining industry, they all looking, and we were as agency looking, counseling, giving counsel about how they can use renewables for their own energy use in an economic way. And that's how we start to develop the first wind project, private wind project for cement industry. But the cement industry was in a site, a very windy site. So they developed the project inside their near the factory. So it was just consuming them. Then we should let they need to have access to the grid, because some factories were far from a windy region. So we said we have to open the grid. And that's how the law allowed anyone producing renewables to have access to the grid, and he pay a fee for that, and he can produce whatever he wants in Morocco and sell whatever he wants. That's how the market started. And after that, we were looking at how sometimes the utility maybe needs to do some investment of transmission, of transport of electricity. So those is in the program of the utility. It's done by the utility. So the investment for the grid is linked to the utility, but the power production is done by the private sector.
And the utility is completely government-owned?
Yeah.
Vera?
Could you please share with us the different technologies that you're using for energy storage at your various renewables plants, and what do you think is the most promising technology out there that you're using? And are you developing any of your own, incidentally, or are these coming from research efforts throughout the world?
No. Well, storage is a big issue because linked to renewables is one of the point that is usually mentioned. We start by doing the first storage that we did in Morocco is through the dams that I mentioned earlier. Two dams. You have two dams and a pumping station, or you can store electricity by pumping water and use it when you want. When you need it. And we have 400 megawatt dam step, what was called station of pumping and turbining. And that's a way of storing electricity, the cheapest way, I would say. Then when we developed this solar thermal plants in Ouarzazate, the heat storage was another issue. Heat storage in melting salt. It's a way of using the heat during the day produced by the sun, and you can store this heat in melting salt that you can retrieve at night when the sun sets. The last point is through batteries. And it's something very interesting because how batteries are under development, but how it's linked to electrical mobility. The factory here in Casablanca is using used batteries from electric cars that can be used again for households and factories. So that's how we managed to decrease the price of batteries for energy storage. It's the approach today. I know that in US, Tesla is developing the same approach with the factory for using used batteries from electric cars to store electricity for housing. It's a huge program in Australia today about big batteries for cities. We're talking about 100 megawatt capacity of batteries to store electricity for a city. We were talking about few kilowatt before, then 1 or 2 megawatt. Now we're talking about 100 megawatt of possibility of storing electricity for cities. Those things will help implementing more and more cheap renewables. So that's why we can afford to have all those possibilities. There is one island not far from here, in Canary Island. Hero is 100% renewable island. How they store electricity? They have wind, they have solar, but they have a pumping station also, and pumping seawater when they have enough electricity, and they can use the electricity by just like a dam for the night, for example. It's not a big island, but you can have in small cases approach that can afford to show that you can have 100% renewables working in a region. If you add to that that your cars are using electricity, and you look what's happening today in the automotive market, into automotive industry, how electric cars are becoming more and more on the field, it's something that is also going to change a lot of things. So you can have one discussion we had in the US also, it was linked to a household in California who can have solar roof, batteries in the house, solar electrical cars, and you can produce your own energy for your own energy needs, electricity coming from your sun, and you can also have your car running with your own electricity. That's something that can happen in very sunny areas today in an economic way. That's the big change. And maybe it will take more time because you need to have cheaper and cheaper storage, because storage is the key. You mentioned that. It's how we have R&D in this field, in this country. Mazen has implementing a research department in Ouarzazate, and also we have an institution called IRSN in charge of R&D, working with universities to look at how we can develop new technology for storage.
Thank you. You had mentioned that the liberalization of the diesel and gasoline markets helped the economics of renewables. But there's been some concerns that the government could regulate again because of oil price trends and backlash from consumers. Do you think that's likely? And if so, do you think that could disrupt the growth of renewables in Morocco?
That's a very actual question because the whole price are increasing again. And it's something that we have to be very careful about. Of course, the price of energy is very important, even for the population, for the cities, for the industries. So the price of energy has to be a little bit followed by the government in an important way. Today, there's a discussion about how energy price has to be regulated again. Of course, we're not subsidizing it, but you need, of course, at the same time, to be affordable for the population. So that's a mixture, and you need to each time adjust depending on the oil price, the world oil price. So that's something very important. And the political approach today is to look at that. I'm not sure that it will change things for renewables or for energy efficiency, because it's, I would say, we have to be very careful. Even if the price of oil is decreasing a lot or increasing a lot, you have to keep your policy, even at this moment. We are talking about mid-term, long-term policies. You need to keep this. It's very important. You cannot change because the oil price, you can have it for 2 or 3 years and then you can have another thing. So we have to be very careful about it. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Does anybody have a question? Well, apparently it was a very clear presentation. We really appreciate your effort getting here straight from Paris.
It's a pleasure.
And we look forward to staying in touch.
With pleasure, and welcome in Morocco again. I hope you will have time to visit a little bit. If you have time, you can also visit our renewable energy project, not far from here. Well, in nice cities like Essaouira, you have wind project. You have in Ouarzazate the biggest solar plant in Africa, and you can look at how things are done. And one thing very important about renewables, they are developed in some regions that are also helping developing the regions. the impact, the social impact on those regions is very important. Usually power plants, fossil fuel were near the coast, quite rich regions. Renewables are developing in some not very rich regions, so the social impact is important, and the social impact is also the jobs creation linked to that.
Merci beaucoup.
Avec plaisir.